Tim, I'm not going to introduce you, but maybe you can self-introduce by telling us a bit about your story. I'll just say a few words about the podcast. We're calling this Connections. Its point is really to humanize the humanities, as we like to say. In other words, sort of put a human face on what faculty and students do in the classroom. And so I always like to begin with your life. And, of course, your name, who you are, how you got here, why we're sitting here, just some kind of human background so that people can get a sense of who you are.
Well, my name is Tim Morton, and if this was a kind of academic version of Alcoholics Anonymous, I would now say, and I write sentences about ecological awareness, and that tends to sort of summarize pretty much what I do. But in terms of life, it's a related issue because I started off life pretty out of my body, and I feel like now that I'm 54, funnily enough, I'm sort of inhabiting my body and my world a lot more than I was doing when I was a kid, and so it's almost like discovering what the very essence of something like childhood, like we like to say, is pretty paramount in my experience right now, and I'm really working on it quite consciously. I'm a huge big fan of therapy. I have PTSD. I'm very out about my mental stuff. I've been diagnosed with depression. I think people like me have an obligation to be a little bit out, about these things. And so it's a little hard to relate the sort of the granular details of some of my childhood, because as I think because we've known each other for a while, there were some traumas in there.
Yeah.
Which, trauma is trauma, right? Like everyone has trauma. And I'd go so far as to say that everything kind of is trauma. Like a really functional definition of the present moment would be all the trauma that we haven't yet processed, right? Like it's happening now. I mean, the word trigger is such a great word, because it sort of implies that quality of just on the edge of, in my case, embarrassingly snapping. I've really embraced that concept.
Can you? We can talk about trauma. I'm really interested. Trauma is really important to religion, by the way, and religious experiences. But can we back up a bit, and can you just say about like where you're from, for example? Like, why do you talk funny, Tim Morton?
Yeah, returning to planet Earth, as we should have been doing, given that I was talking about being in my body. I'm from London. I'm from southeast London. When I tell Californians where I grew up, I say I grew up on the cover of Animals by Pink Floyd, because it's pretty much where I grew up.
Okay.
About 2 miles to the northeast of where I grew up, right on the edge of South London, right on those railway tracks that you see on the album cover, Battersea Power Station. So kind of on the edge of this very strange, almost surreal post-industrial landscape that just kind of extends forever, overlapping with this very twee kind of post-18th century English suburbia called Wimbledon. And yes, I've seen John McEnroe getting out of a car.
Really?
Yeah. For what it's worth, I saw John McEnroe. We've all seen John McEnroe.
But at some point you decided to do a PhD in English literature. Mm-hmm. Why was that? Like, why did you do that? That's a weird thing to do.
That really is a weird thing to do. And the funny thing is that 2 or 3 days ago, I remembered the reason why. And it's because I was explaining something to Claire about the value of
Claire
taking...
being your daughter.
Claire is my daughter. I do beg your pardon.
Yeah.
About the value of taking a humanities class or two. Let's face it, I'm biased. She just started in college. I warned her I was going to be biased, but then she actually kind of liked what I had to say. And the main sort of thrust of what I was saying was like, I'd rather have a terrible existential crisis now and do my PhD rather than sort of wait and see if I should do it or shouldn't do it. And then I'm 40 and I freak out even worse, in a way. It was a very existential decision because it's like you're giving up quite a lot of stuff, You know, I sacrificed and I still continue to sacrifice quite a lot of money coming over the Atlantic to live in America means that if you're going to go back to visit, you know, your parents and your family with your kids, you're looking at an expense of something in the region of $10,000 for the air ticket and all the shenanigans, right? That's a chunk of change, as they say, and for my entire adult life, I've been borrowing from future me, aka having debt. And before I had debt, I literally had to get money from my future fellowship because they wouldn't let me get a credit card when I first arrived in America. And sadly, I've come to realize very recently, having just paid this debt off, that a lot of my life, from age 10, actually, when it was all about getting the A's in a kind of tunnel, has been about paying debt, you know, and kind of transmogrifying myself into a kind of Sisyphus-like being, you know, rolling these little balls of hope like a dung beetle into an enormous ball called despair. But it's made out of little bits of hope, right? Like, next week when I get my paycheck, and when I get to the holidays, when I get this raise, and it's always been the same level of that. That's how I have been affected by my childhood, I guess. One of the ways.
So why, I mean, why then the intellectual life that, you know, does accrue a lot of debt? I mean, debt's a very practical thing to talk about, actually, in the humanities, because people are rationally and reasonably afraid they won't, quote unquote, get a job and be able to pay back their loans. I mean, that's a real thing. And it sounds like you've been struggling with that your whole life.
Yeah, and making the decision every time to just kind of stick with it, but not necessarily for any particularly great reasons. I like to see my life right now as a kind of Blakean struggle between someone I call the demonic angel, and we kind of all know, like the most grown-up sounding voice in your head might be a child's idea of a grown-up voice yelling at you, and in the name of goodness, you might do a lot of destructive, violent things to yourself and other people. That's, you know, on one side, and then there's the angelic demon who's mostly been kind of hidden away for a while. I'd rather be an angelic demon than a demonic angel. But I know that the thing that got me out of my house and into college and doing a PhD quite a lot was this somewhat nefarious, but, you know, very respectable looking on the outside demonic angel guy.
But you write, I mean, I'm just trying to get at this. I'm trying to think about this. So you've struggled with debt, and the intellectual life coming out of a suburb of London was not a natural or easy decision. And yet you write about things that are very much about the future of the planet and frankly our children and the generations coming up. I mean, you somehow went from a very abstract point studying romantic literature to writing about climate change and the environment and what on earth are what on earth are we doing here?
Well, you know, my whole family didn't want me. Well, no, that's not true. My mum's side of the family are all chemistry people from the 19th century.
Okay.
And one of them was a very successful biochemist who did this amazing research on the placenta, which I've used quite a lot. But in that family structure, I was seen as kind of betraying something by going into the humanities, and there was a lot of worry about it. But I feel as if I've been carrying on the mission, actually, because I think what's important right now is to give as many people as possible, like, the feel of being a scientist without having to have the privilege of getting a degree or paying for whatever or knowing how to differentiate with respect to X. There is indeed a kind of sciencey feeling. Why else would you decide to do a science degree unless you have this kind of sciencey feeling, which I think is a kind of mixture of, like, wonder and ready to be wrong and ready to be slightly grossed out even or weirded out and by the sort of excessive signals that you're receiving from your world, you know. And so I very much feel like I'm on the mission of kind of helping people be sciencey without talking about copper sulfate and stuff that my grandfather and uncle would talk about.
Well, certainly your work. I mean, everything. Well, it's all the work on hyperobjects and the ecological thought that's very, in some ways, very sciencey. You know, your point is you can't see these things, right? These are not things we can sense with our five senses, but they're things that our mathematics and our science tells us, you know, is not only likely, but almost certainly the case. So you rely on science, which is really interesting. I, I want to go back though, because when I read Tim Morton, what I read is a romantic philosopher who is constantly flipping the script or bending back, or I don't know what kind of language we want here, but you know, your point that you make over and over again is that we're the characters in the stories we're telling. There is no nature. There is nothing outside us. We are nature. We're already ecological. I mean, there are different ways of talking about this, but you're constantly challenging people to see themselves not just as part of the story, but as the story.
Yes, and in a very particular way.
Yeah.
There is a kind of jargon of ecological authenticity that I've been rather against for some time. And I was actually, funnily enough, just talking about this yesterday with a friend of mine. That actually, you know, when people say, I'm out here all by myself in the middle of nowhere, pay no attention to my wife, who is actually taking dictation. I'm Edward Abbey, by the way, and this is the book Desert Solitaire. Don't look at my wife, she's not really here, I'm all by myself, you know. That kind of, I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it very bluntly, which I didn't say in 2007 in order to get published, infuriated me, and, you know, just needed to say something about it, right? If you've ever had a brush with genuinely odd experiences, you know that the feeling of, am I part of this, or am I making this up, or is this fictional, isn't kind of funny in a way. It's not flippant. It's a flip, but it's nowhere near flippant, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, to me, it's the core insight of the humanities. Actually, is that, you know what? So I work a lot with anomalous experiencers, as you know, and what they'll often say is, "It felt as if I was in a movie." Or it felt as if I were a character in a novel. And my reply is always, you are. That's actually a very accurate perception. Yeah. And that humanists know that. And that's what we're trying to communicate to our students and our readers, is that you are in a movie. Yeah. And so let's rewrite the movie. Let's project a different movie.
This is crucial to thinking about ecology, aka thinking about being a biological being in a biosphere. Yeah. This is not about some kind of immediacy, folks. This is about everything is mediated. Just think about the simple fact that brain signals, by definition, arrive after the thing that they are signals about or of. And so there's always this temporal kind of structure to it, you know. The attempt to get rid of it is infuriating, especially from the point of view of someone who has in fact studied a lot of contemplative traditions, and in particular the sort of esoteric Tibetan Buddhism, you know. These guys are all about that quality of not quite recognizing what you're expecting to find is the ice cream that we're going for here, right? The sort of, there's nothing to see quality of mystical experience is crucial, because fundamentally it's actually about, and this is where I'm just going to stick my neck out and say, this is what I'm doing, guys. I'm writing a book. I'm writing a book with William Blake, because I couldn't write a book about William Blake, because that would be like copying out the telephone book, and who would want to do that? Hey, look at this great quotation. That's amazing. You know, so instead, kind of finding a way to write with Blake, and I hope that doesn't sound too pretentious. I've had experiences in the last couple of weeks of almost channeling something. 2 weeks ago, I wrote 6,000 words in 2 hours without stopping, and I didn't know what I was writing, but it looked really accurate and not in need of great editing, and it was as if it wasn't even like I was copying the idea out. I literally didn't know what I was saying, but it was super, super coherent. And this is part of it, that's having this intuition that actually that feeling of distance and strangeness, and is this really just an illusion, is actually part of the signal of how you can know something is quote unquote real. And the bigger that something gets, the more this becomes an issue, right? So one of the sort of checks about, how bad is global warming? Has it really started yet? People in the newspapers like to sort of talk this way. That uncertainty is precisely an index, an indication that it has started. When you're in a car crash, time appears to slow down or stop because your reference frame just dissolved, and you get a sense of, is this really happening? Is this happening to me? Is this even a thing? Romantic poetry's made out of it, right? That's how I got into this. I do apologize for my circumlocution. This is addressing a thing about 10 minutes ago. But when you read enough, Coleridge, Charlotte Smith, Wordsworth, Keats, you become acutely aware of how they're all trying in their different ways to stage an encounter between beings in as sort of honest a way as possible. And that means, what is it really like to encounter someone different? We think we know, and we set a high sort of premium on looking like we know as quickly as possible. It's called Facebook and Twitter. Therefore, the person with the most leisure time to figure out the right things to say is the winner. Therefore, the most privileged person will still be the winner there. And this was an issue in the Romantic period. It was called the Age of Sensibility, not Facebook, but it's the same thing. I kind of still feel like we're on the edge always of waking up into a more nuanced kind of romantic sense of... Romantic comes from the French word for novel, right? Like this feeling of you're in a story, That would be so much nicer than this myth that we must immediately know what the other is or who the other is. That seems very damaging to me. Mm-hmm. A genuine encounter with another person is going to be an encounter with a fundamental kind of uncanny strangeness, And this is what the Romantics were doing. Like, what does democracy really smell like? It certainly doesn't actually smell like we know exactly who we are. It's actually got this fundamental intrinsic quality of uncertainty to it. And this is something that I have a lot of patience for it. Maybe because I meditated a lot, maybe because I meditated a lot because I had to survive a lot when I was a kid, but like being super patient with not really knowing things seems like the best possible tactic, especially if you're a smart person, especially if you're smart enough to know that, being smart ain't all that.
So let's first of all, when I wrote an essay for a festschrift for my own mentor, and it was called "Being Blake."
Ooh.
And what I said in the piece was, I don't want to write about William Blake. I want to be William Blake. So it was this very similar kind of romantic sensibility. Yeah. There's the kind of notion of writing or inspiration as channeling, I think, is really powerful. But where I really want to go with this, though, is your Buddhism. You've invoked it already, but there is something, and maybe it's that kind of non-dual or reflexive or flipping the script quality to your thought that does feel Buddhist to me in some ways.
For some reason, well, it's because I'm writing this book, I've been watching this old documentary series, which I didn't see when I was a kid, but I heard a lot about it, The Sea of Faith by Don Cupid, right? Oh. And he's taking you through this incredible journey like that and being very kind and honest to religion. And in the end, landing in a place that I find very familiar, which is like, let's make a claim for kind of trans-religious mysticism.
Yeah, that's
right?
Very Don Cupid.
I am a New Ager, in fact.
Yeah.
I do the crystals,
Yeah.
And this is, in fact, good insofar as I'm relating to my pleasure. You know, I'm relating to my basic my basic being, and I have a lot of time for, you know, I'm spiritual but not religious.
Yeah.
I think that's a thing.
Yeah.
And I think that an awful lot of what is thought and felt and said and experienced in religion is an absolutely crucial way of understanding how we are in a biosphere. And I'm just waiting, actually, for the Martin Luther King or the Malcolm X, and I do think it has to be tied to very strong anti-racism, to arise in the eco world. Because right now, ladies and gents, we've got shouty people, you know, who are right about everything. And I'm so sorry, guys. I'm in a kind of militant mood because I'm writing this book, but it's like some people, and I'm not going to mention who they are, but when you know, here's page one of the newspaper. You're stupid. Look at all these facts that you didn't know about the world collapsing. You open the middle of the paper, you're evil. You're a bad person. Editorial, right? Some of these guys might as well be working for big oil, for the mode of absolute nihilistic despair that they promulgate in their readers. So in the key of caring about ecology, they're actually all about not caring about ecology. And again, it's like, this is a thing that I've been trying to say louder and louder and louder, and now I just sort of say it, you know. If you don't consider strongly feminism and anti-racism and so forth in your ecological speech, you missed a step, and you could well head towards fascism there, actually. Some kind of solution that doesn't have anything to do with what we've done to ourselves, which is how we can treat amphibians the way we do, you know, because we treat each other a certain way. And so, you know, people like me, you know, we shouldn't bring our hangover mind to the editorial page. We shouldn't wake up going, oh my God. When I wake up, I don't know about you, but I see crop failure. You know, I've been studying this for decades, and I've been in that world listening to it. And, you know, something terrible happens in Britain, and I think, what happens when it's happening every day? Oh, even white guys are going to experience the fun of not having any food to eat. So I'm seeing all this stuff super clear, and then what do? I get up, and I put that attitude back in the sock drawer, and I go and make breakfast for my kids and for my cat. And I try as hard as I can to put on a great suit to help people. You know, you don't want to bring this kind of, God, One of the ones I read the other day was saying, literally, it was a tweet, and it literally said, even I told you so doesn't sound pleasant to say right now. It was so twisted. It was saying I told you so and not even liking the I told you so about, you know, global warming.
This takes us right into the gut of something else I wanted to talk about with you, and it's the joy and the humor that I feel around you. I pick it up in your books, in your texts. You're not a negative person. You're not despairing. You're writing about some pretty scary stuff, Tim.
Oh, yeah.
But you're ultimately hopeful or optimistic, and I think that's one reason you're so frankly well read. And by well read, I don't mean you have read a lot of books. I mean a lot of people read your books, and we can get into the sort of the Hollywood uptake of your work and the way that different entertainers and musicians and filmmakers have picked up on your work. But this joy and humor is rare, frankly, in the humanities. As I often joke, the truth must be depressing. If it's depressing, you're smart. If it's joyful, you're a dilettante. You know, there's something wrong with you.
I am, in essence, Jeff, a fin de siècle French aestheticist. All these words are pejorative terms, like anarchist, you know, decadent aestheticism. You know what those guys were about? They were about exploring and amplifying pleasure, aka our biological sort of networked existence vis-a-vis the biosphere that we live in. And they were ready to take on board pleasures that could be seen from a certain point of view as too much or too little, as sort of slightly gross or slightly not enough, which is a good definition of disgusting, right? I think in an ecological age where human beings are considering reaching out to other life forms and to each other in different ways, what is called beauty will always have a slight halo of disgust around it. And this halo, there are poems about it by Baudelaire called Spleen, But funnily enough, this feeling that he inculcates in those poems, which he calls ennui, you know, oh God, I'm really covered in vampires and it's really late in the afternoon, but actually that's quite cool, but it's a bit gross that I think it's cool, but it's cool that I think it's gross that I think it's cool. And you're kind of oscillating between enjoyment and disgust there. What is this? This is the essence of being a scientist without any data sets, right? This is like the biologist I heard on the radio a couple of years ago crying to the anchor because he was narrating a story about how a sea lion mother was loving on him, and he let that sea lion in, he was crying, but the way she was doing it was feeding him dead penguins. And so it was gross and beautiful and touching and at the same time, I think there is a lot of, and I'm going to sound totally new age and I don't care, wisdom in the body. I take it from me, who has been slowly parachuting into theirs for 5 decades. It feels much nicer now that I'm a bit more in, like I say, an awful lot of religion seems to me actually to do with allowing for certain kinds of pleasures that might be sometimes seen as excessive, aka the good old bliss. And I'm not talking about some kind of weird, subtle, trippy one. I'm talking about the gross one. The one that is the genuine miracle in a way, because it's the gateway to the other ones. We have this amazing thing where we have like a nose and eyes and ears and wow, this is really great. And kind of the way in which very esoteric parts of religion kind of line up with something ever so similar to this quality. Actually, one of my teachers, my main meditation teacher, was talking about what is called Vajrayana, which is one of the esoteric pathways of Buddhism. In Vajrayana, you're using your pleasure as the pathway. It all comes out of rice pudding. Buddha was whipping himself and burning himself in the forest, and then this old lady showed up with a bowl of rice pudding, and he ate it, much to the annoyance of the other people. And as a starving himself for ages person, I guess it was the cholesterol that we have to blame for how Buddhism arose, because I once didn't eat cholesterol for months and months, and then I did because I was feeling very sick. And it was a spoonful of fish soup in Bodega Bay, where Hitchcock made the birds. And the bliss that came out of the sort of fatty, buttery fish soup as it went down my throat, is, oh my God. When Buddha did that, is, oh my God, the pleasure is the pathway, Jesus, right? Like, it's cool to pick grapes on the Sabbath. And what are you talking about, stoning this woman again? What? Why are you doing this? Mary of Magdala, I figured out with this Blake book that actually what I really want to do is not just say that we require a religion scale response to the biggest problem on the planet, because religion is where we've hidden all of the human being goodies for thousands and thousands of years. It's time to get them out of the pantry called heaven and remember that they're actually an aspect of us being evolved beings in a biosphere, But, of course, irritatingly, I've got my own ideas and I'm bloody well going to tell people. So in this book, I'm actually coming down on certain issues and saying, no, this is better than that.
This book, meaning the one you're writing now, this is from the book. You showed me a piece in it on hell.
Yes.
And nobody.
I do beg your pardon. The trouble with being immersed in a book is everything becomes the book, and so you can't remember to remind people that you're doing this weird project. Nobody is Blake's amazing term for the kind of God that many people think they want to believe in.
Yeah.
Right. he is precisely a kind of scarily absent being. He's nobody, actually. He's nobody turned into daddy, you know. My take on that aspect of religion is it's the basic version 1.0 CCTV of a life form, which in psychoanalysis is called the superego and confined only to human beings. That basic, let's turn the camera on myself, you know, and the confusion of that with some kind of voice of authority coming from some kind of beyond, right? And the beginnings of a belief in the beyond versus here, and then a belief in subject versus object, right? Which is always master versus slave. And William Blake was acutely aware of that, you know. I guess I figured out a way to kind of move along with him a little bit.
You know, so religion's my shtick. I mean, that's
They are, Jeff.
yeah,
So much more your shtick than my shtick.
That's my thing. And first of all, Nobo Daddy's one word. It's hard to say, but it's this great Blakean term. You know, people don't generally understand that most of the religious physical postures are based on this master-slave relationship, or the king kneeling, praying, submitting, bowing. Yeah. It's all stuff that comes from ancient monarchies. Yeah. And if you didn't do that to the king, you're dead.
There's an unpleasant amount of retweeting of stuff. And the thing what I figured out about the Vajrayana is, you know, so in that system, you're visualizing yourself as the monarch. Right. This is how they kind of subverted it. It's like anyone can be with a crown. Right. It's got this sort of proto-democratic feel to it in a way. And that one of the main rules is you got to be pretty pro-feminist. And you disparaging women is number one rule, don't do it. Right. In the Samaya vows. And so kind of sort of non-patriarchal places that are kind of squirreled away in the official one are very intriguing to me, you know. And they seem to be talking to an era that we could call a scientific era, aka the one that happened before religion showed up, that went on for millions of years. I mean, my picture of human beings is it went science, 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 just try these herbs, it's going to be good. Religion, science, 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 hopefully that's how it's kind of going to go, right? And what got squirreled away in religion, how did people start explaining the world that way to themselves, you know? It seems so very, very related to we did something catastrophic to ourselves and to our environment.
But what you're articulating, Tim, is, I mean, to play the professor of religion here, the problem with science is it's very dualistic. Yeah. It's very subject-object. You know, there are objects out there in three-dimensional space.
Well, I would say, Jeff, that it's scientism that is dualistic. I would say that it's a kind of religion of little scientific factoids that you take to represent some kind of modern amalgam of stuff. And this was actually what Blake was going after.
Yeah, of course.
You know, he wasn't really opposed to science. No. He was actually opposed to kind of, Alan Watts has a great phrase, nothing but. You know, the importance of reducing the world to absolutely nothing but. It's just got to be these nasty bits of porridge.
The problem is what most people think of as science is scientism, right? I mean,
that's the trouble. It's scientism can creep in to the methodology. You know, so I'm teaching this class.
Well, let's talk. Yeah, that's kind of where I was going. I mean, it's a big question course. It's for the dean's office in the School of Humanities, and it's called "What is a Fact?" And you chose. You chose actually the funniest post. I saw all the posters that you were given as choices. You chose the funniest one. It's got I don't know, it's a unicorn in a striped shirt, right? Let's not talk about the unicorn. Let's talk about the idea. What is a fact?
And by all means, let's digress back to this notion of joy and humor, and just say, incidentally, that I don't think of that as like a kind of sauce that I pour over something pretty sad. You know, I think the basic kind of whatever it is about being alive is extremely playful. Life is saying something true about the universe, which is that we live in a quantum universe, not a mechanical one. If it was a purely mechanical universe, reversing entropy even slightly would not be on the cards, and a life form is a thing that reverses entropy for a little bit, aka it actually reverses time. That is kind of magical. Yeah. Bits of me get replaced, and I'm still kind of sort of me, but only kind of sort of, and this is all to do with the fact that, life as such is not just restricted to beetles and trees. Life as such, which I call thumos, after this Greek word, where we get the word rhythm from, the last syllable of that word, it literally just means palpitating. Yeah. The vibration. When quantum theory says the universe is alive, it's basically saying something correct, which is that it's palpitating, aka it's moving all by itself without being mechanically pushed. And you can put that on my gravestone. You can say...
That's a long thing to put on your gravestone.
The shorter, cuter version is objects shimmer without mechanical input. That used to be a little kind of talisman I would carry around. It's still too long for your gravestone. It's still too long for my gravestone. Yeah. Why are you looking at this gravestone? Maybe that would be the thing on the gravestone.
Well, just tell us about the class. I mean, what is a fact? Let's start there.
A fact is an interpretation of data. You can't peer under the hood of data to see the fact. You have to interpret patterns in data. What is data? Data is Latin for things that have been given. Yeah. Things have been given, right? There's a Sony camera over there. There's Jeff sitting there. There's memories of what I was eating for breakfast. Some of these things are sciencey data, like measurements of velocity and spin and stuff like that. And some of them are other kinds of data that aren't yet captured by science. Like, it reminds me of my grandmother, or wow, that's a very interesting rainbow check pattern on your shirt, Jeff, right? And we, in the humanities, basically teach you how to recognize a fact at all without the specialist narrow scaffolding of a certain kind of fact legitimation, what's the right word? Process game, something like that. Biology is about how to make facts that are biology true, right? Some guy who edits Nature Biology looks at your article and goes, this logically hangs together, so I guess we can publish it even though I don't agree with you. It's true enough, right? And this is the thing about modern facts. They are always what philosophy calls modal. There can be amounts of their rightness. Einstein didn't get rid of Newton. He just made Newton less right.
Yeah.
If you want a slingshot around the moon, Newton is still right. Yeah. So you've got to accept a world in which you can be sort of wrong, half right, kind of sort of true, not quite. In other words, you have to accept a world in which the possibility of QAnon and fake news is an ever-present danger.
Yeah.
As in what Hannah Arendt says about fascism.
Or climate change denial.
Yeah. Yes. And how to talk to people. The how is the what. That's very much what we teach in humanities, and it doesn't sound like much. And we're very disinclined to think about anything like the tail wags the dog in a way that sounds good or cool to our very scientific heads.
Well, the question then is how this has come up in a lot of the conversations with Connections, is how do we talk to people? How do we play a role in the public or society in which climate change denial or QAnon is much less plausible? Because the truth is, people believe all kinds of things that simply are not so, right?
I basically feel like one of the best things someone like me can do, someone like me can't solve this completely, but someone like me can inculcate in people 3 magic ingredients, which I think are, the ingredients for creating a world based on an actual future, aka the possibility that things can be different, as opposed to just repeating the past. We have a pretty obvious choice now. Keep the wheels churning and destroy Earth, or try something slightly different and don't. And for me, it's beauty, irony, and ambiguity. For me, the ultimate
public's not very good with those things.
Chemicals.
What are the 3 things again?
So my task is to make this, give people the feeling of it. That's my sense of being a responsible humanistic scholar.
What are the 3 things again?
Beauty, irony, and ambiguity.
Juicy?
Beauty.
Oh, beauty.
But juicy would be good as well. Juicy beauty. would be extremely good. Um, you know, ambiguity is a signal of accuracy.
Yeah, I agree.
You have glasses, right? So you're at the eye doctor, and it's always, is it number one or number two? Number
Right.
one or number two? And gradually the prescription gets more and more precise until it devolves into a moment when you cannot decide.
Wow.
Number one or number two, they're both equally good slash crappy, because lens grinding is crappy and optometry is crappy and you're crappy and time is crappy and your money is crappy and blah, 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 blah. This is as good as it's going to get. You have an ambiguous choice right there, which is a very precise choice between at least two things that are equally good. What does that mean? You have an accurate prescription, no matter what you choose. So actually, ambiguity is an accuracy signal. And if you want a very, very rough and ready, doesn't always work, fake news detector, it would be, is this news yelling at me in the key of this is totally unambiguous and you must totally believe it? I think it might probably be therefore fake news.
Right. That's religion. That's a lot of religion, by the way.
It's a lot of what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, art is a dirty word for... No, how funny. Three cheers for... I was about to say, ladies and gentlemen, art is a dirty word for propaganda. The three cheers for Freudian slips. Propaganda is a dirty word for art, which is a polite word for propaganda. And in a way, what we're all doing is a very, very important thing that William Blake called mental fight, that some perhaps less exciting people might call ideological struggle, and some possibly more exciting people might call working in the dream world.
The other key for me about, let's call it wisdom for lack of, I mean, this is your three features, is humor. Actually,
Yeah.
the ability, but the not laughing at another worldview or another person, but laughing at oneself. Stepping out of one's own beliefs and convictions and finding them hilarious.
Well, and the goodness of that is that reality is comedic, because everything is exactly what it is, but never exactly as it appears.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
You can get as much data as you want about this room, but that's data. That's not this room.
Right.
And so there's an ironic gap between, water bottle data and the water bottle, because it's about water bottles, but it isn't the water bottle. And so reality as such is ironic. The Greek word aeron means clown, and that's a very physical word, actually. The guy who stands next to you and kind of apes what you're doing, making it look silly. This is basically the methodology of a philosopher like Socrates, just like kind of ape people until somebody laughs or thinks, God, that looks really weird, And how interesting is it that just simply physically being, which is very much Socrates' shtick, right? Like you can do philosophy anywhere, involves this big smile. There is a Tibetan philosopher, unquote philosopher, called Longchenpa, right? And he has an amazing thing. I'm going to paraphrase it because it's my way of saying it, but he says, since reality is exactly as it is, but never exactly as it appears, you might as well burst out laughing. And that's pretty high level.
Yeah,
I feel,
that's very high level, actually.
And I feel like, when you see one person, like the priest in the Catholic Mass, going through the motions of trying to extricate themselves from what is called their fate, because you live in an agricultural society, only to find that they've, knotted it around themselves even worse in the attempt to escape it. It's called Oedipus. When you see 8 people doing that, it's called Fawlty Towers. Tragedy is just a small twisted region of comedy space, and the key, I think, is in the distance that the audience has towards the tragic character, that the inevitable kind of, well, I'm glad it's not me, actually, let's admit it, I'm not Macbeth or Hamlet, When you're in a comedy, you immediately recognize yourself as one of the schmucks on stage. The fourth wall is much less rigid. You're part of it. You're part of it. Every few minutes, your body does this spontaneous dancing called laughing, And then at the end, you do the formal dancing called clapping, which dissolves the play back into the dance whence it has always
So
come.
that to me is the romantic insight. That's the flip. That's the flipping the script that you do so well. The fourth wall is the people I work with saying, I was in a movie or I'm in a novel. And I'm like, yeah, that's the fourth wall. You are.
Yeah.
And that's what you do over and over again in your books and your work, I think, in the world.
I I don't know. I just have an acute sense of it. I always love that bit in Penny Lane where Paul says about the lady selling flowers, poppies from a tray, and though she feels that she's in a play, she is anyway. You know, even if you think you've got it right, it's still going to go right.
Well, you also write a lot about Decker and Blade Runner, who is hunting replicants.
Oh, essential vitamins, right? Like the creepy sensation that you probably might be a puppet, that you might actually be an algorithm,
Yeah.
software, the Descartes version, the part 2 of the meditations. Part 3 is like, but God wouldn't do that to me, which is just like, you just added that on. The second part is this intense paranoia that you cannot actually get rid of, and I feel like our basic biological being, because it's made out of chemicals that take time to create the signals, inevitably involves this quality of, is this for real or not? What is this about? And the attempt to quickly shut down that question into some kind of answer,
Yeah.
I don't like. I can't remember his name. He was called the Genius of Vilnius. He was a rabbi in the late 18th century, and he had a dream of God, and God said, would you like all the answers or all the questions? And we don't even have to say which one this rabbi, of course he preferred to have all the questions.
Yeah. I have a friend named Whitley Strieber, and his wife's no longer with us, but she used to say, we're too young for beliefs. What we need now are better questions.
Wow.
And it's always struck me as kind of, signal of what we do in the humanities.
Yeah, no kidding.
Tim, let me let's wrap up. Let's talk about the school itself.
Yeah.
And the humanities is on a kind of national or international level, and maybe you could say something about your work in film and this recent movie that came out that I think a lot of us saw called Don't Look Up.
I was amazed to find on Twitter about 3 years ago the beginnings of a company called Hyperobject Industries, and since I'd written this book called Hyperobjects, I thought, wow, did you just use the word because it was cute, or was there some kind of content to it?
That's my word. That's my word.
On a related note, you wouldn't believe the number of people who say to me, you should copyright that word. And I'm like, why? Because I don't want anyone to say it? Because then you have to pay to say the word hyperobject? Jesus. So I didn't really mind if it was just using the word, without any sense of what it was. But then the director, Adam McKay, who made Anchorman 1, 2, and 3, hilarious films.
I saw Anchorman. I saw the movies. Yeah.
And The Big Short, and then blah, blah, blah. Serious and funny at the same time. Assured me that this was genuinely going to be about things that are so big you can hardly point to them, which is what a hyperobject is, And funnily enough, one of their first shows was about QAnon, and then they'd made this movie, Don't Look Up. Now, of course, movie world is a lot of moving parts, I'm not the sort of person who they're going to ask to write the script. I kind of wish that I had been, because just between you and me, I think what really Adam should have done, because I'm friends with Adam a lot, he should have done Anchorman 3, where Ron Burgundy and the news team discover a plot by Tyrannosaurus Oil, or whatever it's called, to hide the global warming facts in 1977. Right? You go back into the past in comedy mode to slightly tweak it for people. Instead of what they did, I'm so sorry, Adam, which is, I told you so, there's this overlap between fundamentalism and that kind of... Yeah. I'm going to say it, I'm so sorry. I get paid to say evil stuff, folks, and I'm about to say Bernie Bros or something like that. People who know they're right, yeah, in the key of tremendous anger and making everybody wrong. How's that been working out on the left, guys? We got to grab them by the psychic, and humanities is about learning, how to do that, actually, with some amazing kind of gracefulness, and to also to not be rolled when other people try to do it to you.
Yeah, it's very dualistic again, right? I mean, and it probably doesn't work. I mean, just on a political or moral level, it probably doesn't work to make fun of your interlocutors, as it were, the
Yeah, I
people you're
think
trying to reach.
basically, here's my take on all this. The biggest problem on the planet must, by definition, be the most attractive problem to solve ever.
Yeah,
It's got to be the most sexy, amazing, this gets me out of bed thing to work on ever for people who say they're religious who live in the South,
yeah,
who are never going to watch Don't Look Up,
yeah.
because we need everybody, you know.
I think about that all the time. I mean, not that
Yeah.
precise thing, but like when I drive around, well, just driving around, and I see a football stadium, or I turn a TV on and see a professional baseball game, or I'm like, wow, they've spent literally billions of dollars on a game
Yeah.
that actually doesn't go anywhere. Why aren't we investing in our problems? Like, I mean, it's been a while since the Apollo program.
It's funny when you live in Houston,
Yeah.
because you live in this totally broken place. But there are these things in Houston called churches. And when you go inside them, everything is sparkling clean
Right.
and ornate and psychedelically beautiful. And you think to yourself, could we get some of the mojo that's inside that building
Yeah.
to work on the
That's-
outside
that's what I
of
think
that
about.
building with the traffic lights hanging down and the incredible potholes and all that jazz? All this goodness, all this lovely, loving, caring, empathy, all that stuff, is squirreled away in things like churches or Buddhist. I'm not exempting any religion here, not at all. My pathway towards Buddhism was really, in a way, backtracking for a moment to answer the question you asked a long time ago, having to do with a tremendous seriousness about something I didn't really understand called meditation. I heard the word when I was like 7, and immediately I thought, I've got to do that. I want to do it. And, I got peer pressured into the kind of Christianity that you might get peer pressured into if you're 13 years old in a certain kind of school. And I wanted it to be to do with, what the is this thing called alive? What is it? You know? And not lots of kind of rules, especially the Church of England version, which is very kind of twee, and like rules upon rules upon rules, and suddenly it's all just about how to eat a slice of cake in the vicarage garden, you know. Suddenly, wait a minute, where's my amazing mysterium tremendum actually gone here?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm someone who benefits very much from cleaving close to whatever that is. And I think whatever that is your biological being actually talking to you and going, I'm just out of reach, guys, for reasons having to do with the simple fact of chemistry, because chemicals don't go at the speed of light. And so my world is just tantalizingly out of reach. Don't delete that out of reach feeling. That's exactly how the feel of embodiment actually is, as opposed to this stamping and insisting that now I'm a genuine, authentic person because I'm in a desert writing on my own. You know, I would take any day some kind of weird, is this for real, kind of a work of art, as a more genuinely ecological statement about being a
That's
life form
interesting.
than this earnest yelling that goes on.
Yeah,
everywhere.
some of my graduate students who work on essentially paranormal topics, they love your work because
Thank you.
there's a real connection between an ecological sensibility
Oh,
and focusing on anomalous experience.
there really is, because, once you've accepted that consciousness and sentience and life as such are
Yeah.
very hard to define,
Yeah,
as opposed to non-life or non-sentience, you have, as it were, invited a whole bunch of undead, doppelganger, vampire,
Right.
ghoul, ghost, spectre-type beings to the party.
yeah, everything shows up.
Right, and lo and behold, my old friend Sabonfu Some, who was a shaman in West Africa, in her culture, so-called nature people were all about deception. and tricksterishness. And am I really, is this really a tree? These are actually biology questions, right? Like, where does the tree stop and the fungi start and the whatever?
Yeah. So, Tim, to sort of wrap this up, do you want to say anything about the humanities as a whole?
Gosh.
I mean, what?
I would like to say that, first of all, it's a privilege and a pleasure to be doing this with you, Jeff. And, as I'm sure thinking is a team sport. One of the things I've learned from Rice is how to genuinely ask for help with other intellects. I don't think that was clear to me in my youth, but I'm not sure it was the fault of where I was working. I'm pretty sure it was my fault, said a guy who was in a whole bunch of EMDR therapy.
Well, there's this. I mean, there's a reason I send students who work with me to you. I mean, that's that teamwork, I think, or at least I hope it is. And I do think we live in and we work in an intellectual community that's incredibly gifted,
Yeah.
and incredibly diverse in all kinds of ways. And I think our students, well, I know our students are better off for it.
Yeah. We just need to make louder, more confident noises about it because, guys, the humanities is the actual stem. In the Middle Ages, the word for stem was trivium, which we get the word trivial from. But before it was trivial, it was a three-legged stool. Right. And what was this three-legged stool? It was the stem of how to do astronomy and whatever. Theology was considered a science. But first of all, you figured out, step one, how to operate the operating system of meaning. It's called grammar. How to create meanings that are coherent and correct on their own terms. It's called logic. How to convey that to yourself and other people in a way that doesn't suck. That's called rhetoric, right? Then you can go and specialize, right? And really, we need to get our mojo back and stop saying, we're kind of good, really. We do nice, pretty things that don't really mean anything, but we are really... And if I have to hear the word steam again, I think I'm going to need to reach for some kind of gag, or I don't know what's going to happen to me if I have to hear that word.
Yeah, it's sort of a giveaway, isn't it?
Yeah. So don't forget the arts. Yeah. You've already forgotten them with that attitude.
Right. You've just integrated them into STEM.
Do you care about meaning being something that doesn't come from on high, or that can be extricated with a lot of violence from inside of an object, right? Do you give about that? Remember that we do a thing called humanities that's actually about that. Have you got confirmation bias? We have an app for that. It's called, critical thinking or close reading or whatever the hell it is.
We have an app for that.
Let's look at these Rorschach blots called poems and figure out the manifold ways they could be interpreted accurately, And let's also notice how there is a kind of you are here sort of dot in every single thing that you're reading that orients you as the reader, and you don't have a lot of say. You come into theory class thinking, this is going to be about learning that nothing really means anything, and you come out of class thinking, actually, a whole bunch of what I thought was me is determined by a text. And, one of my theory teachers when I was 19 said, please don't panic. This isn't really about do I really exist or not. And she was trying to calm down the riot that inevitably happens in the psychoanalysis class, because funnily enough, it's not the Marxism one that freaks people out. It's the psychoanalysis one, because it's saying something very rude, which is that there's always a flip side to your whatever that is. Don't ever mention the unconscious in public unless you want to get seriously creamed.
That was actually my intellectual awakening, and it was a Catholic seminary, and it was psychoanalysis. And as a kid growing up in the Midwest, I had never heard of the unconscious.
Yes.
It didn't even occur to me that. And once I realized that human behavior was largely determined by forces of which individuals were completely unaware, I was like, oh, wow. Yeah. That was a wow moment.
And as those forces become more obvious, because the groups that we need to think in the scales of get bigger and bigger and bigger to confront this planet problem, it becomes extremely expedient to figure out what the hell it is to be in a group, guys. Because right now we need to be in a group called human beings plus all the other life forms stopping fossil fuel emissions now, And people like me must be failing at how we talk to people. Otherwise, they'd all be doing it. I can only accept responsibility for my bit, right? So, and if I can understand the problem, which is that we're not getting across to people, it means that I'm responsible to change that. And I personally basically think that the humanities gives you a way to understand that you can promulgate and foment and work on the soul. I say soul, Jeff, nowadays. I don't say mind. When you say mind, you always hear body.
Yeah.
You know, it's
You
always
think, and you think
dualism pops
cognition,
in, you know.
you think cognitive behavior or something.
And soul, probably also there's some kind of Scooby-Doo ghost in a bottle there. But it's an odd enough, strange enough, short enough, evocative enough word for me.
Yeah, you're forming or making a soul.
And soul is really, you know, this amazingly loose and overlapping with other people's pile of everything you ever saw or touched or thought or shook hands with or took a class with. Or...
You know, one of the ways I define the humanities is it's the study of us that changes us.
There you go.
It's
yeah.
It's soul making.
It is.
And
right. And that's the mission. And let's actually be very out and confident about this mission, because it's really what we do. And if we actually really like what we do, where's the harm in talking in as if you liked it to other people and yourself?
Right.
You know, and of course, you know, there are so many ways for intellectuals to police that, having to do with insider and outsider, whatever that is, and the whole notion of the fan in cultural studies. And by heaven's sake, try not to look like one, or look like one but like a really cute one, or something like that.
Or roll your eyes, or be ironic, or whatever.
Yeah, there's
Don't
nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing can stop the slide from slightly disinterested appreciation to throbbing, buzzing fandom. There's no Kantian police out there policing that thing called aesthetic experience. Everything is like magnetizing you with its mesmeric powers.
You know, even the word fan has religious meaning. I don't know if you knew that. It comes from the fanaticus, the person in front of or the person connected to the temple or the deity. The fanum. The fanum is the temple.
Yes, that's extremely religious. I might even say, yeah. You know, when you're doing a long meditation retreat in the Rockies and you're doing some kind of chanty thing, and most of the people in the room are actually kind of like getting into it while they're doing it. They're actually moving their body, you know. And this is the kind of thing that I like to promulgate when I do a lecture. Not that I'm anything like my Buddhist meditation teacher, but just the fact that I'm aiming for a kind of quality of experience. Content of what I'm saying is almost a distraction or lure to get people into the vibe. And, you know, the more I work with it, the more I think, you know, language in terms of words is just the foam on this massive ocean of energy. And what you're really doing is you're working with energy. And once you figure that out, you can be like, okay, is this nice energy that's going on now? Or should I just slightly vary the texture so we get something slightly more chewy or less whatever? You know, you can do that.
That's what you do in your books, Tim. And I assume in your classes, too.
Thank you, kind sir. You know, I am a very strange, old-fashioned, arrogant teacher who stands up in front of first years and says, everything I say is right, so just copy it out and then regurgitate it in the exam because I'm the best. But I think, like, a first-year student should have someone like me. I'm not going to say senior because it sounds ageist in a way, and I'm not going to say advanced because it really isn't true. Gargoyle. I'm going to say gargoyle. Gargoyles, who you see on the outside of the church. Okay. These fierce, grinning bouncers who are slightly, are they inside the religion or not? These protector beings. It's your full professor teaching a 101 class. It's what I've wanted to do all my life. You know, it's the myth that the Zen abbot is the guy who does the toilets.
Yeah,
you know,
you want to be a gargoyle.
I'm a gargoyle. You know, I want to smile in a kind of weird, slightly threatening manner at first-year students and be like, This is a teacher. This is the blackboard. This is the classroom that you're in. And now we're going to learn something because I know something that you don't. And you're going to write it down because I'm the best. And never use Wikipedia because in this class I'm the best. It's just like that kind of level of self-aggrandizing, sort of breaking all the rules of pedagogy, which luckily I never took class.
All right. Well, listen, that's a good place to stop with Tim Morton as a gargoyle in a first-year class.
Jeff, it's been a delight and a pleasure. You know, whenever we talk, and we do talk quite frequently, there is for me a delicious sort of coruscating magic to it, and you've done it again.
Good,
my friend.
You've done it
to me.
No,
again.
We've done it. That's not me. It's we.
It's a delightful resonance, and I'm honoured to be part of this. And I personally believe that religion is the greatest department at Rice, folks, if you're thinking about that kind of thing, really seriously, and that you guys give it a good name. You know, self-reflexively studying at this depth. You know, I'm sorry, English lit, but you kind of lost the plot a little bit somewhere there.
Lost the plot. I don't know. Yeah. Well, there's lots of plots too in religion.
So many. Yeah.
All right, Tim. Well, thank you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for being with me.